A warm welcome on this chilly Monday afternoon to COVID and young people behind the headlines, an opportunity to take stock of the challenges the pandemic poses for young people right across the UK, and to look particularly at those working to help students navigate this dreadful crisis. My name is Mark Easton. It's my absolute pleasure to have been invited to chair this event, which is hosted by the wonderful charity IntoUniversity. I'm told that hundreds of people have registered for this giant Zoom. So thank you to everyone who's taken the time to join us today for a discussion on such an important issue. So do please use the Q&A box to post your comments, your questions, anything that comes into your head, for questions for our panel, or you can actually vote for other people's questions too. And I'll do my best to include as many of you as I can. If there's a question that doesn't get answered and you want it answered, I'm told that afterwards we'll make sure that it does get answered. The headlines have suggested that COVID is some kind of leveler. Its malevolent impact is felt by all, whatever your background. But the facts behind the headlines show how those from poorer backgrounds are suffering its grim consequences far more than the better off. And that's particularly true when it comes to education. There's a world of difference between homeschooling in a house with space, Wi-Fi, and a quality laptop, and trying to do your studies in an overcrowded flat without a decent computer, technological or educational support. The attainment gap between rich and poor children, I'm afraid, well, it looks certain to widen. And the uncertainty spread by the pandemic is felt much more by those who haven't got the resources to fall back on. All young people are unsure what the future will bring, but it can be much harder to hold on to an ambition to go to university, say, when the virus devastates your household finances as you try to care for a sick family member or grieve after the loss of someone close to you. COVID-19 means that the job of supporting young people from disadvantaged backgrounds has never been more difficult, but has never been more important. Across the next hour or so, we're going to hear how the sector has responded to the extraordinary challenges of school closures, policy changing almost every minute, and of course, restrictions and lockdown. We'll hear what IntoUniversity has been doing, how schools are responding, and learn about the work of children's universities, trying to support some of the most vulnerable young people with learning, recovery, and encouragement. But before we meet our panel, it's absolutely right that we begin by hearing from a young person, someone who understands directly the effect of having their education and all their plans thrown up in the air by the pandemic, and the importance of having the right support when you need it most. I'd like to welcome Christiana Uzanova. Christiana arrived in Britain from Bulgaria with her family at the age of 6, and she learnt English from scratch in just 2 years. Extraordinary. This, she says, has sparked a lifelong passion for learning. Now, Christiana's been supported by IntoUniversity, participating in corporate mentoring, networking events, and completing an internship for Bloomberg through the Big City Future Initiative. Having had her A-levels cancelled last summer, she still won and has taken her place at the University of Warwick, where she now studies psychology. Thank you so much for joining us, Christiana. I know you've prepared a few thoughts on how lockdown and all the uncertainty of the pandemic has affected you and, of course, countless other young people. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my delight to welcome Christiana Uzanova. Christiana.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Mark. Hi, my name is Christiana. And as Mark mentioned, from a young age, I've had to kind of build resilience in everything that I do. You know, I started school with pretty much 5 words in my vocab, and I was thrown in the deep end. So I was always kind of motivated to do something, and always had the drive within me because I knew what it meant not to have the drive. So right now I study psychology. I'm interested in mental health in young people, and my work with IntoUniversity has been so encompassing of everything that has kind of built me to become who I am. And when I heard that I had this opportunity to talk on this panel, I was very excited, but I also wanted to diversify what I had to say. because my experience and the resilience that I went into lockdown with might not have been mirrored in other people. And so within what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to interject some of my friends and peers' experience, because I think it's important to bring light to others apart from mine. So, like Mark said, my A levels were cancelled, meaning that kind of in March last year, we were left just questioning what was going to happen in the next couple of months, which was very hard. And it took a massive mental, it took a toll on our mental health, because, you know, we were starting to work towards our A levels, and now it was just wiped away, and we had no motivation really to work towards a goal. It was quite difficult to make sure that we were keeping on track and kind of understanding what was going to happen to us in the next couple of months, because it was so uncertain. And with the transition from A levels to uni, that was incredibly like challenging, because uni is an incredible experience without COVID, but with COVID, it's even more exacerbated how like the big jump. There was no kind of like leeway into it. It was kind of, you were just thrown into uni and online lectures, never having done those before, meeting people. Like I barely know my course mates, which is quite like sad, even though like I see them on Teams and on group chats, and kind of we talk about the work, but I kind of never see them face to face. And I think this COVID has highlighted the key thing in all of school and like education and its support. Like education and the school environment is so much more than learning itself. It's about being with your peers. It's about building relationship, like socially kind of thriving. And not being able to do that has kind of really taken a big shift in how young people have developed or how they're going to develop. Um, and yeah, it's just the whole work ethic. That's another thing. It's quite difficult to see an end point now, especially with like the job market. And I'm a young person looking for a job, and it's quite difficult to see what that will look like in the next couple of years. And so all of those pressures kind of just really take a toll. And all of my friends, the creatives and people who are in STEM, they've said that they've genuinely never experienced such like a block in what they're able to do. And they're very capable people, so it's quite saddening to see that kind of their abilities have been stunted by the pandemic. So yeah, I think in general, moving forward, it's the biggest takeaway is support. And I'm not sure how that can be done, but IntoUniversity has done an immense job in helping through the pandemic. You know, they've ensured the internships have a contingency plan, that online mentoring and corporate mentoring has still taken place, which has kind of retained the normalcy of everything, which has been quite a nice thing to have, despite like not being able to go to the centres and kind of see people in person. And another good thing is the pandemic has allowed us to kind of reflect. So despite the uncertainty of the future, it's kind of allowed us to take stock of what we have and what we want to do, and kind of reflect on who we are as people, which I think for young people especially, that's quite a useful thing to do, because you know we're always on social media, we never have time to stop and just breathe and just take it all in. So you know, I think I kind of like to take a positive spin on things. So despite all of the injustices that the global pandemic has highlighted, I think a moment of reflection has really started to prevail, and like there's conversations happening around the world on very important topics. And I think that's a product of us just being able to take some time off and just look at the world and the state it's in, and hopefully it will get better. But yeah, that's been my experience.
Well, it's been a privilege to meet such a confident young woman who's clearly managed to make that transition to university in the most difficult circumstances. One thing, I know that you were saying that you're doing psychology, you're really interested in the mental health of young people. And I wondered, in terms of the support right now, because I know that for a whole generation, this is a really difficult, troubling, anxiety-making time, and clearly mental health is going to be a huge, huge
Mhm.
aspect of this. What are the kind of things in practical terms that can help support young people? What can organizations like IntoUniversity and others do to make sure that the mental health of young people is protected as much as possible?
Mm. That is a very loaded
Big
question,
question.
yeah, it's a very big question,
But
and
what
that is.
worked for you? I mean, what worked for you? Maybe put it that way. I mean, were there things in sort of specific terms in terms
Mhm.
of the kind of support when you thought, oh, that's really, really helped?
Um, Connection through online events. I think during my internship back in July, it was all through Zoom. However, it was still something more than um, kind of having nothing. So I think the most that people can do is kind of provide a platform for young people to just communicate. And I know that kind of seems like, oh, social media is like that, but kind of IntoUniversity is an educational organization, and kind of facilitating a place where young people can congregate for an educational purpose that's aside from school, that's kind of um, like an after school club, I'm guessing, like something like a respite out of education, but also still communicating with young people, and just provide more information for places they can go to for their mental health. I think the more that gets pushed around and kind of shown to young people, the more it will kind of become a normal thing to kind of look out for.
And I think it's that trusted voice, it seems to me, that
Yeah.
you want somebody that I mean, on social media, you'll have all your friends and there'll be howl around almost from, people talking about the problems they're facing, but to have somebody who can provide you with, sort of clear, considered, thoughtful advice about, you're not in it alone. These are the kind of support measures that are available. I guess that's quite important.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And IntoUniversity staff have definitely played a part in facilitating that and keeping that going. I have my mentor, and she's incredible. She's we've had a couple of calls during lockdown, and we've always been able to communicate. So keeping all of those programs alive and well and kind of working, kind of hopefully maintain the normal level of communication and kind of support.
So your experience of university, I mean, you went to university in the middle of a national lockdown, basically, and so are you at home? I mean, or have you gone to Warwick physically, or what's the situation?
So before the lockdown, I managed to come back to the flat. So I'm with my flatmates. I'm back at Warwick on campus. What campus looks like is it's pretty, like, the facilities are kind of closed, but there is still some support. So like from the wellbeing services, and there is still some learning spaces available, obviously with like loads of precautions. And I think the big the reason why I came back just before the lockdown was to have the support of my flatmates, because I know it's like young people and being able to kind of just have a bit of time to just relax, because back home it was just me and my parents, so it was kind of like a different different vibe basically.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking, I mean, obviously you don't know what it would have been like if it hadn't been because you weren't there, but um, your expectations of what university was going to be like,
Mhm.
are obviously going to be very different from actually what you're experiencing, because I presume that you're having to do most of your studies online, and you're not getting many, if any, sort of face-to-face tutorials or anything. And I'm just, how do you cope with that? I mean, what advice would you give to other students who are thinking about going to university but are really not sure? We don't really know quite how things are going to pan out in the next year.
I definitely, like, despite there being a global pandemic, I still recommend people to go to university, or to still seek out some sort of learning and kind of motivation to study, because as much as it is difficult to study online, and it's something that I had to adjust to and kind of adjust to online lectures and online tutorials and seminars, it's taught me a lot, and it's still something to keep me going. um my advice is, if young people are studying, separate kind of work from relax. I think that's my biggest thing. I think it's quite difficult because everything's online on your computer, which you would probably use for recreational purposes, and now you're also using for work. It's very useful to just kind of have a cut-off point during your day to say, okay, that's me done, and kind of create that mental health barrier where you're like, I'm leaving this to the side and now I'm gonna be, you know, a uni student, but still from the comfort of my room.
I guess one of the great challenges for charities like IntoUniversity and for schools and anyone who's supporting young people through these difficult times is that given that university, the experience of university is so different, that you're not able to have all the extracurricular stuff, the social life and all of that. What would you say to somebody who comes from a family that have never been to university before, but they're thinking of going, but they're feeling, I'm really not sure. It's an expensive option. It's not. I'm not going to get the full experience. I mean, what would your thoughts be then?
I think I would still say yes. I would still say do it because, you know, there are maintenance loans, there are government loans. The university has schemes, I believe, that help people who need IT help, so like with a laptop or any like finances to pay their accommodation. And there, it can be possible. And I think money should never be the barrier to getting an education and making sure that, you know, you do something that you love. So for sure, 100%, I would say, yeah, there's nothing that should stop someone from learning.
That's the right answer, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so much,
Christiana.
Mark.
And Christiana's going to be staying in our virtual conference hall to answer any other questions people may have as our conversation develops over the next hour. Our next presentation comes from Ailish O'Donnell. Ailish is IntoUniversity's regional cluster manager for the Southwest and head of learning recovery, a phrase which has taken on new urgency with so many young people's education disrupted by the pandemic. So without further ado, please welcome to our virtual stage, Ailish O'Donnell. Ailish.
Hello, thanks very much, Mark, for the introduction. And I'm going to do my best following Christiana, because what an inspirational young person to kick us off tonight. And I just think it's so important to have that optimistic message of looking for positives to come from this. And I'm really pleased that I've had the opportunity to listen to you today, Christiana, so thank you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about IntoUniversity and our model and what we do, where we are based in communities for the long term, and how that's helped us to address these issues that we're talking about today. I'm then going to talk a little bit about some of these issues, and actually I think Mark summed it up nicely in the introduction, that we're really looking at existing inequalities that are being exacerbated by COVID, rather than problems created solely by this pandemic. And then finally, I'm going to talk to you a bit about our learning recovery response and some of the examples of the work that our centre staff and programme teams are developing. So firstly, our model. We run 31 learning centres and projects across the country in England, and we're opening in Scotland this year, very excitingly. And we have worked for over 15 years in areas of high need, working with young people aged 7 to 18, and we provide pastoral care. It's a pastoral based model to support young people to achieve their chosen aspirations, whether that's to go into university or any other chosen ambition that they have. And we do this in a wraparound suite of programmes. We'll work directly with young people and also form partnerships with local schools in the community. Our learning recovery response has been very much based on that pastoral care approach that we take. So we're taking a trauma-informed approach to learning recovery, because it is just in line with how we work. We think that the well-being of young people is foundational to their ability to learn, so we need to address that. Obviously, we're doing things alongside to support the academic performance and social skills, but it's really about making sure that we're looking at the whole young person and actually increasingly working with families. We've always worked with families, but this has really strengthened that work. So in terms of the issues, the problems that we're seeing, that the challenges, the massive challenges that young people and families are facing, is an amplification of what was there before and a magnification. So headlines really simplify complex issues. It's not just about access to resources. We hear a lot about laptops and the digital divide, and it's a real thing, but it's not enough to give everyone a laptop. It's that support behind the scenes of how to use it, how to understand the work that's being set on it. Really worryingly, the attainment gap is widening, and it was widening before COVID. So the Education Policy Institute, their most recent report based on 2019 figures, showed that the gap was widening at primary school. So when young people who are eligible for free school meals, and that's largely the group of young people that we work with, when those young people finish their GCSEs, they are on average about 18 months behind their peers before we had nearly a year of disruption to schooling. And I read today an estimation that about a decade's worth of work is undone. So potentially, so in terms of the challenge facing us, I don't think we can underestimate it. But in terms of the way it's reported, I'm not sure it captures some of the scale even, and certainly not the nuance. And actually, when we work with young people and with families, circumstances are really complex and individual, and every young person needs a tailored response. And that's what we're able to do, working based in the heart of communities and knowing young people and their families for the long term. So I just wanted to touch on a few of those issues and draw one of those things out about laptops. Actually, it keeps coming up in conversation. So the last couple of weeks, our delivery staff have been making phone calls to our academic support students. They did that in the first lockdown. They actually made 27,000 phone calls in the first lockdown to our students to support them week in, week out. And the last couple of weeks, they made lots and lots of phone calls to our students, and that was to talk them through how they were going to be able to access our online learning, because it's we've moved one of our programs online. So I think that's just a very small example of how it's not just about the resources, it's the support, as Christiana so eloquently put it. And in terms of, just to sum up some of the challenges, we saw that over, I think last Easter, we saw a tripling of child protection or safeguarding concerns being recorded. Our families are facing really challenging times. It's basic things like access to food, heating, water, like being able to pay your bills. That context can really shouldn't be underestimated, the impact that stress is having on young people and their ability to learn. So what are our solutions? What does learning recovery look like for us? Well, as I said, we've taken a trauma-informed approach, and it's all about making sure that we're addressing the well-being needs, the social skill needs, and the academic skills of our young people. When we reopened in September, centres were full of stories of how wonderful it was to see the young people again, but how some young people returned quiet, not really making eye contact, that they'd been through a really tricky time. And others were bubbling with energy and enthusiasm to get back into centre. And I think that's an important thing about that tailored response, is that what we need to do is to know the young people, to understand what they need, and to adapt and adjust what we're doing for each of them so that it's appropriate, the support that we give them. So I'm going to talk just 3 things about our learning recovery. the relationships and how crucial they are, our staff expertise and energy and enthusiasm, and adaptations we've made to programmes. So I mentioned the calls that happened during lockdown to our over 3,000 academic support students, and those are the students who come to our homework clubs week in, week out, that we will know really, really well. It's like the equivalent of having a form group if you're a teacher. And during that first lockdown, it was phone calls. September, it was face-to-face, safely re-engaging with young people and supporting them. And now it's online. But it's not just online, it's also phone calls to check in with people pastorally. And those phone calls last week were 15, 20 minutes at least to understand each young person's situation. And for those people that don't have access to good enough devices or internet, we'll also be following up with regular phone calls and supplying work through email to make sure that no one is left behind. In terms of our training and expertise for our staff, the first thing we did for learning recovery in terms of expertise was trauma-informed training, so that every member of staff understands what behaviour might mean from the young people that they're working with. Centre staff have been given tools to look at making rough assessments of what young people need based on their social skills and their well-being and academic needs. And we as a team are learning all the time to move these programs online, to make sure it's good practice, to make sure that we are up to date with those policy changes so that we can give the right advice to young people when they need it. And in terms of the program adaptations, like I said, we work directly with young people in our academic support, but we also work with schools, and we have moved those workshops online over the last few months so that we can continue to work with schools during this remote working period. I think one of the key things that we are focusing on is making sure that we're building metacognition in our young people, because we know that has a good evidence base for helping support their academic attainment, and especially for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Like, they are doing a lot of independent learning now, and if we can support them with that, we will have an impact on their attainment. The same with oracy, making sure that they can really express themselves well, and supporting reading, because there's been a lot of coverage about how that's really taken a hit. We'll be focusing on our core academic support students, but continuing to work with schools, which I'm really excited about, that we can extend that offer to them as time is going on. So yeah, that's just a bit about what we're doing. We're working in communities with young people and schools. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that, and fascinating. And there are some questions which I'm going to throw to you in a second. But first of all, you used the phrase trauma-informed approach a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds quite dramatic to somebody who doesn't really understand what that means. We tend to think of trauma in terms of almost like a sort of war victims or something like that, or somebody who's been through some appalling sort of personal tragedy. What does it actually mean in practical terms for a young person who's getting your support, who's in learning recovery, or trying to sort of hold their head above water in these impossible times? What does trauma-informed mean? So
trauma-informed question comes from the approach that this is a period of loss. Everyone has undergone some form of loss, whether it's loss of freedom, loss of social connections, loss of stability or security in terms of future, and that is stressful, and that prompts your kind of fight or flight response, and it builds anxiety. And this is a chronic period of stress, and that, when you're undergoing chronic periods of stress, can I don't want to use rewire, but it definitely has long-term effects on your brain and your physiology.
And you think, well, I mean, I'm just trying to sort of reflect on the challenge, as you quite rightly say, was there before. The attainment gap was far too large in this country. And then, of course, along comes COVID, and everything tells us that it's going to widen an already far too wide gap. But I wonder, actually in terms of, okay, there's the challenge. Can we be positive, though, about some of the work that you're doing, the lives that you can turn around, and can you can actually achieve amazing things?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, in terms of what our centre teams do, they started academic support last week. And it's wonderful seeing the screenshots of these smiling faces of families of primary school children all crowded into one screen, engaging with their online sessions together. And I think because we work for the long term with people, and we're working with very young children all the way through, I think that stands us in good stead for the kind of, you talked about a generation. Actually, we're going to be with young people all the way through. So our response is looking at what are you going to need down the line.
7 to 18, that's an enormous range of ages. I know we're running out of time, so I want to just quickly throw a couple of questions to you before we go further. Daniel Hall says, hi, Eilish. Daniel here from National Project Uni Connect. I wondered if you could share, I have no idea what this means, by the way, but I'm sure you will. I wondered if you could share your targeting selection framework and also how you've had success accessing the hard to reach families in the first instance. First generation students often also share parents unwilling to engage in any way with outreach. Do you have a good model for engaging these parents? Actually, I think I do understand the question, but it's quite a big one, so good luck.
In there. So firstly, I think I'll talk about how we engage with young people. Because we're based in communities, we literally occupy, say, a community centre. We are a physical space that young people and families can come and visit. We're there for years, so we build over time.
So they know you. That's the thing.
They know
some part of the landscape rather than sort of parachuting in.
Yeah, so we might just see some young people in school, but other young people will see, for homework support, they'll have mentor with us, they'll do work experience with us. So it's long term, it's multifaceted. So it's not just a one interaction. I think we've got lots of chances to build those relationships, which are key.
All right. Now, David Marshall says, question for you. Would you be able to clarify the research you're using to inform the value of metacognition in the work with young people in the centres? And if possible, what that looks like in practice? These are some pretty detailed questions, but hopefully you'll be able
aren't they?
answer that one.
I would is that the end of the question? I would heartily recommend the Education Endowment Foundation. So EEF.
Okay.
Do a lot of summaries about research that underpins evidence-based practice in education. They've recently put something out about a summary of about, I think, 60 reviews of online learning and good practice. So the EEF, Education Endowment Foundation, would be a good place to look for that research.
There are questions flooding in, and we're not going to be able to answer all of them now, but we do have a Q&A session after all the presentations, and hopefully there'll be a chance for you to for your questions to be put then. So huge thanks to Eilish, and as I say, don't forget to use the Q&A function to submit your questions. I will sure we have lots of time for questions a little bit later on. Our next presentation, though, is from Natasha Barley. Now, Natasha is the director of Hull and East Yorkshire Children's University, a multi-award-winning charity that raises the aspirations of children in primary schools and in care across that region. To explain how they've responded to the challenges of the pandemic, please give it up for Natasha Barley. Natasha.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Mark. So I'm going to talk about what we were doing pre-pandemic. Then I'm going to talk about how that changed when COVID hit. And I'm going to also talk about what we need to do long-term to support children in their COVID recovery. So Hull and East Yorkshire Children's University is based in Hull, which unfortunately is an area where 1 in 3 children are growing up in poverty. So what our charity was doing before COVID hit was working predominantly in our main program with primary schools taking children out on experiences that raise their aspirations and show them that there's a bigger, wider world out there that they have every right to access. So we have a program that's based on concepts of learning. And those concepts of learning are: I'm intelligent, I'm fit and healthy, I'm creative, I'm ambitious, I'm proud of my city, I'm thinking about the future, and I'm enterprising. And within each of those different concepts of learning, there are experiences. So for example, for I'm ambitious, those are all of our workplace visits. So we take children out into the world of work to teach them about the different career opportunities that exist for them locally. So that could be a visit to Smith and Nephew to learn about the world of work there. They speak to different members of staff, everybody from the CEO down to people who are working in the factory, making the actual bandages, and the engineers that are fixing the machines. So a lot of our children come from families where there's third and fourth generation unemployment. So actually getting them out into the world of work is extremely important. Our other program is our Children in Care program. So we work with about 100 children in care, and we have different elements of that program, one of which is a one-to-one reading scheme for children in care, because they're often quite far behind academically, particularly in literacy. And literacy is obviously the foundation for all your other learning. So it's really important that we get them up to expected reading age. We also take them on experiences as well. So those experiences don't happen during the academic year. They happen during the holidays because we don't want to interrupt their academic progress. And we also don't want to single them out from their classmates. And we also have our Step Up, Move On program for children in care. So that starts in year 7. And children in care rotate through a 7-year program with 10 children each year, coming to the university campus and experiencing what life is like on campus, learning about the different degrees that they can get if they decide to go to university. And then learning about different universities they can go to. It's a progressive program, so they stay on that program for a full 7 years. So we have a fairly comprehensive program. To give you an idea of scale, in the 18-19 academic year, we took 7,668 children on experiences. And before COVID hit, we'd actually managed to take 5,011 children on experiences. When COVID hit, it was obviously quite challenging for our charity because everything that we do is based on working with children in person, working with schools in person, and getting full classes of children out on experiences. So we had to think about, okay, this isn't about what we can't do. We know what we can't do. What can we do to help these children to make sure that their education is disrupted as little as possible, to keep them learning and to keep them safe and happy and healthy. So we started working with our local university, which is Hull University, to create education packs, which was funded by the university. So we managed to produce 1,766 of these packs, which were filled with numeracy, literacy, science, and well-being resources, which were then distributed to our schools to then give to children that they knew would have very few learning resources at home. And I went out and delivered some of these packs to schools. And I'll tell you a little story about a child that I saw when I was delivering some of these packs. So there's a school called Old Fleet Primary, which is in a ward of really high deprivation on Greatfield Estate, and a school that we do a lot of work with. So I'd pulled up in the car park to drop off these packs, and I saw this gorgeous little boy running enthusiastically into the school. And I assumed that he was picking up some resources to take home with him. And I could see his father walking behind him, looking a little bit stressed out, probably because he was trying to home educate his child, and just looking a bit gloomy. And this little boy, as I was unloading the packs out of my car and getting them ready to take into school, came bursting back out the door, so excited, this huge smile on his face, one tiny little plastic bag in his hand with a pencil and an eraser in it. That was it. And that is what that child had visited school for, to get, because he clearly didn't have a pencil and an eraser at home to do his schoolwork. And that was just a moment that has stuck with me throughout this entire pandemic of how difficult this situation genuinely is for families on the breadline, and how hard it is for them to provide for their families and their children. And if you don't even have basic resources at home, how are you going to home educate your children? We also started getting a lot of phone calls from schools who were telling us that children's mental health was being severely impacted by the pandemic. We knew that our children in care, they were really struggling with their mental health. That's always something that's an issue for children in care, really, because of the traumatic experiences that they've gone through. So we thought, right, what can we do to support their well-being? We can't see them in person. We were checking in on all of our children in care through phone calls and chats with their carers, and video sessions. But we thought we could put together some packs for children to utilize as well. So we started producing well-being packs, and we distributed 2,594 of those. And those were just filled with well-being resources, mental health resources that could be accessed alone or with a parent or a carer, so that if children weren't in a position where there was anybody that was going to be able to help them utilize those resources, we knew that they could adequately access those by themselves, and use those alone or with their siblings. So those packs actually have been tremendously popular, and we keep getting emails from schools. We cannot keep up with the demand because we don't have the funding to make enough packs for all the children that need them, sadly. So that's something that we're still working on. And right now, the biggest focus for us is to continue to produce education packs, because we know children don't have any resources at home, but also the digital divide. So it keeps coming up in the news, and it is a huge issue. The government's distributed 700,000 laptops thus far, but there are 1.8 million children who don't have access to a device in the UK. So we contacted all of our schools to ask them, do you have enough laptops? Has the DFE met that requirement for you? If not, how many do you need? Are there any on order that you're going to be getting? And from the schools that we work with, that we were in touch with, we've had requests for 865 devices. So we're currently running a GoFundMe appeal, as well as an upcycling appeal, which is part of the BBC Make a Difference campaign. So people donate laptops to us. We work with a company called Primary Tech, who wipes them for free, provides a certificate to say that they've been wiped, then loads a new operating system onto that, and we're able to give those out to schools as well. So we are aiming to make sure that we can give as many children devices as possible, as quickly as possible. And we're hoping that working with different partners, we'll be able to get to that 865 devices. And the win-win there is that the school keeps those devices after the pandemic. So the children are effectively borrowing them, they get returned to school, and the school gets to keep them, because on average, primary schools have one device that's shared between 4 children. So they'll definitely benefit in the long run from having those devices. And quite sadly, the situation is even worse for BAME children. So 1 in 2 BAME children does not have access to a digital device. And that's just not right. We need to make sure that all children have access to a device, so that's a level playing field educationally. So what do we need to do in the long term to support children in care and children from disadvantaged backgrounds? We believe that all children, regardless of background and economic circumstances, deserve to be supported and nurtured to achieve their full potential. To do this, number one, we need to look at our education system. It's antiquated, it's not fit for purpose, and it needs a total rehaul. We need to get rid of SATs and setting. It needs to be holistic, and it needs to focus on the world of work from Key Stage 1 onwards. We also need mandatory mental health support for children in care, which should be a part of their transition into the care system for them and the carers they are living with. We need long-term mental health support for all children. So we need programs in place that will prevent children's mental health from declining in the first place. And if it sadly does end up declining for whatever reason, we need to make sure there's adequate mental health provision in place. And my last point is that as a society pre-COVID, we were to a degree very single-minded. And we're going to see a huge increase in demand for the services that Hull and East Yorkshire Children's University provides, as well as IntoUniversity. So we need to make sure that we all work together to ensure that all children are able to fulfill their potential.
Great stuff. Thanks, Natasha. There's a question actually from Alexa Broad. She just says, I'd love to know what was in your packs. How much do they cost? And are they only for primary school aged children, or do you have wellbeing packs we could model for secondary pupils? I mean, tell us more about your packs.
Sure. So the education packs were about £30 each. Because we're a charity, we were able to get huge discounts, and we ordered in massive volumes as well. So a pack would actually retail for about £84. But yeah, because of our buying power and because of me probably pulling on some heartstrings and asking for support, we were able to do those quite inexpensively. So inside of an education pack, is a book, is either a well-being journal or a book that supports mental well-being. There's something called a curiosity box. So that's a really cool science experiment that the kids can do at home. There was a book, a reading book that was appropriate for their age level. And there was a maths activity book as well. So a really fun maths activity book. Those are really pitched at upper key stage 2, but you could obviously adapt them and do them for younger ages as well as older ages. It wouldn't take a lot of tweaking to do that. Because we focus predominantly on primary schools, our focus was to make these packs for primary school children. However, our well-being packs were upper key stage 2 and lower key stage 3. So we did provide these to secondary schools as well.
You could work across that transition then for kids moving school and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Perfect
So,
for that.
Yeah, because mental health is a serious issue. And one of the hardest times in any child's life is when they're transitioning from primary school to secondary school. And their mental health can really suffer and their emotions are all starting to kind of come to the front. So there were some mood cards inside of that resource that were really valuable that you can utilize, again, by yourself or with other people to help you understand your emotions and help you to process what's happening to you.
Okay, now Alexa just says she represents Abingdon Schools in Partnership today, so that's where she's from. Henrietta Linsell asks, can you let us know where to send an old device if we wish to donate? Is there a simple way of doing that?
Yes, absolutely. If you go on our website, www.hullchildrensuniversity.com, there's information on our website, or if you email c.lockton@hull.ac.uk, she will send you all the information that you need to be able to donate a device. Yes, please. If anybody has a
Fantastic. That's a result. Good. Thank you so much, Natasha. We'll have more questions in a little while. Do use the Q&A button where opportunity knocks for all of you. Our final presentation this evening is from Mohsin Ismail, principal of the Newham Collegiate Sixth Form Centre, a remarkable school in London's poorest borough, where 95% of pupils last summer were offered a place at a Russell Group university. 4 of its pupils received offers from Ivy League universities with scholarships worth £1 million. Like the vast majority of the students at the school, all 4 are the first in their families ever to go to university. Now, Mohsin is a really interesting character. He gave up a 6-figure salary as a city lawyer in 2014 to help set up the school in the area where he grew up, and has frankly astounded the educational establishment with what has been achieved. So with his perspective on the educational challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, please welcome Mohsin Ismail. Mohsin.
Thank you very much, Mark. And can I begin by showering praise on the panelists who've spoken already in terms of the absolutely fantastic work that they're doing to support young people. So I've got about 10 minutes and I want to just share with you a couple of ideas and thoughts about the current situation. But I want to begin by providing some statistics, and some panelist members have alluded to this already. The Sutton Trust released a report most recently called Learning in Lockdown. And in that, they highlighted that 5% of teachers in state schools reported that all their students have access to an appropriate device for remote learning. And when you compare that to 54% of private schools, you can see why there's been a big discussion about what's been termed the digital divide. Additionally, 86% of private schools students are using online live lessons, and you compare that to 34% in March. Ofsted have released some information about whether that is the best and the most appropriate way of delivering education, but the fact that you have teachers in front of you day in, day out in private schools compared to 34% in state school, again, is also going to have an impact on the quality of teaching and the attainment gap that was alluded to earlier on. 55% of teachers in the least affluent schools are reporting a lower than normal standard of work compared with 30% in private schools. And 40% of children in middle class homes are taking part in 5 hours of lessons a day, compared with 26% in working class families in their homes. And the main recommendations made by the Sutton Trust is to prioritize providing laptops and internet access, and we've heard about that. Provide schools with a 750 million boost for their disadvantaged pupils via the pupil premium, as well as the catch-up funding. And educational websites and online learning services should be 0 rated by internet data providers. So these are some of the things that we know about and are being discussed in mainstream media and amongst educational circles. But some of the things that I think is not getting the attention that I think it deserves, and is going to have an impact on young people through sort of indirect challenges and consequences, is, for example, the impact on teachers who are now having to manage their home life and teach their lessons, and the impact of that in terms of the quality of education that young people are going to be receiving day in, day out. Also, it's quite unsustainable to have this live lesson, remote teaching going on for what looks like to be a term all the way to Easter. And I think that needs to be factored in terms of how this is going to impact our young people and the education and provision that they're receiving. What also is not talked about is potential head teacher burnout, given the amount of new information coming out as well, the need for project management on a scale we've never had to deal with. And I think we risk losing those head teachers who have professional capital, lots of experience, who are towards the end of their career, who may have wanted to stay for an extra 5 or 6 or 7 years, making the decision to leave the profession. And we're going to require the experience of these head teachers to be able to provide the level of education and provision and the support needed once we turn the corner on COVID and we're out of this pandemic. I think it's also worth talking about the government constant U-turns. This creates anxiety amongst the teaching profession, and our leaders are losing credibility as a result of this. And then with this, we're unable to give certainty to our students. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking about the centre assessed grades for that are going to be awarded in the summer, and I had a Zoom session with 320 of our year 13s. And it was meant to be scheduled for about 40-45 minutes. It lasted 2.5 hours because of the amount of questions that they had and the anxiety around the lack of information and certainty about what's going to happen going forward. And I think a lot of the things that we've been talking about could have been avoided if there was some level of planning, strategic planning at a more system level and at a governmental level as well. We then move on to talk about examinations. And yes, there's been discussion around how examinations are not taking place this year, and centre assessed grades given by teachers is what's going to be the order of the day. But we haven't really thought about the credibility of these results. So, what do they mean to employers in the future, and how will they, what currency will they have? And I think we need to be able to have that discussion and conversation with young people and employers, because young people are worried about that. Is the centre assessed grade given by their school and their teachers going to be worth the same as students who've had their A-level results last year, the year before, or in the future? And what will employers make of that? And also there's a growing chorus of educationists who are talking about removing exams altogether and seeing this as an opportunity to really revamp the educational system in terms of examinations. And I think one of the concerns I have about moving in this direction is when educationists are talking about this, is when they think about the alternative system. It's a system which traditionally has favoured middle-class families and has been at the detriment of students who are in disadvantaged backgrounds. And the fact that you have GCSEs and A-levels, that is a real leveller, which really allows young people to be able to demonstrate their potential. Again, we've also now had students who were given GCSE grades last year, who have come to do A-levels, and some of them are now struggling with the complexity and the rigor of A-levels. And because we had some form of grade inflation last year, there's going to be a group of students who have taken courses which traditionally or in previous years may have not allowed them to qualify in terms of the entry criteria to get onto these courses. And we're now going to have a position where students are going to be trying to apply to university with predicted grades that may not be that strong, and may have to be recoursed as a result of that. That's going to be added anxiety and pressure on our young people when applying to university. And we also had the issue about resits in November. I called them resits, but they're not really, because they haven't had a chance to sit an exam. But if that takes place in November, we're going to have students who've completed their GCSEs and not happy with their exam results, have to resit in November, but potentially they've missed another year of learning because most of the colleges are going to be full. And again, that's another issue which is going to have an impact on our young people going forward. We're also now starting to see the pressure from parents and teachers to award higher centre assessed grades, and the implications of sort of university places if students don't get the centre assessed grade that they want, having to resit in January and then having to take another year out to be able to go to university the following year once they sit in January. So that is, I guess, a pretty bleak picture of where we are at the moment. And I read this quote from Romans 13:12 that I'd like to share with you, because I think at some point whilst we acknowledge all of the difficulties and challenges, there has to be a discussion about how we move forward. And it says, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, therefore let us cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. And I want to just maybe spend the remaining couple of minutes that I have talking about where we should be trying to go and what are the initiatives we should be trying to employ to help our young people out of the quagmire that they're going to find themselves in. I acknowledge there are lots of challenges, and I don't intend to discuss the matters outside my sphere of knowledge or experience. But in terms of education, I think that these are the priorities we need our leaders and organizations to begin planning for. Now, we talked about a recovery curriculum. The reality is we're not going to be making up the lost learning that's taken place. But I think we need to be okay with that, because there's lots of knowledge we don't teach our children, and we don't have an issue with it. The curriculum is ram-packed. There's lots of fantastic stuff we could be teaching our young people, but we don't. And therefore, we need to be comfortable with that position. However, the current situation is about exam preparedness and to allow students to compete on even footing to receive the grades which allow them to showcase their ability, talents against students nationally. And for Ofqual and the exam boards, they need to start reducing the specification content for summer exam 2022. And again, I'm not seeing any discussions around how this is going to impact the current year 12s. And they could get ahead of the curve by doing that. They need to change the exam papers to reflect this. And then schools can begin planning for the catch-up provision in the summer and when we get back, because we will have a condensed curriculum to be able to teach the current year 12s. Universities will also know what gaps exist, because it may not be covered on the specification, and therefore they can plan ahead and support the young people who are going to transition to university the following year. External organizations were doing a fantastic Herculean effort already to continue to support mentoring, coaching, and university progression, but also extending their programs to support less privileged students whilst at university. I know that already takes place. Again, they are best placed to know what they will need, but I assume it consists of workshops, soft skills, progression routes, advice, and guidance. And again, the off-core consultation, and I've mentioned briefly about that. I think the last couple of things is about the leadership vacuum that we find. Government needs to work hard to establish credibility and win back the trust of young people and the sector. It really does need a robust and logical plan which inspires trust rather than demanding compliance. And unless they get this right, and unless they work with the profession, we're going to continue to see this piecemeal approach without much joined up thinking that's alienating the profession and educationalists. The reality is, longer term, we need better schools. Report after report, Social Mobility Foundation, Sutton Trust, and the government's own State of the Nation reports continue to highlight the inequalities in our education system. And the pandemic has brought these into sharper focus. We need to really think about how our most disadvantaged young people receive the best possible education. And in itself, this will require a whole Zoom session, but targeted focus on areas where poverty is prevalent, ensuring the very best leaders and teachers are concentrated there, trying to end the brain drain to overseas independent schools, so we continue to keep our UK trained teachers, drive to have a certain type of education ideology which leads to school improvement, and stop experimenting with what works when we have some really good data about what schools in disadvantaged areas do that actually deliver results. And we also need to incentivize high quality graduates into the profession and then train them appropriately so they're prepared to teach in areas of disadvantage. So I think I'm going to end there and take any questions that may have come up from my presentation.
Martin, thank you so much. That was absolutely fast. I can sense your frustration in a lot of what you were saying, and you forgive me as a BBC person if I don't engage with some of the criticisms that you make. But I tell you what, I'd be interested in understanding. I mean, your results have been utterly extraordinary, and there's been a lot of focus on the success you've had in taking children from some of the most disadvantaged and deprived neighbourhoods in the country, and find a way of supporting them through to going to the best universities in the world. And now you're having to do that in the middle of a global pandemic, with a lot of online learning, with a lot of distance learning, with a lot of people missing out on stuff. It's an unfair question, I suppose, but there will be schools, there will be parents all over the country just desperate for a bit of wisdom, really, on how they should. There's the fundamentals of how you focus on that with a kid perhaps who's got enormous potential, But as we've seen so often in where they come from disadvantaged backgrounds, that can easily fritter away. So how can we right now, in the midst of this pandemic, make sure that we give those young people the very best chance?
I think therein you've highlighted the key challenge. They're not with us in school, and when young people are not with us in school, it becomes extremely difficult. But I would hope that one of the things that I heard when I was in my early days of teaching from quite a reputable educationalist, structure liberates children, and that seems to be almost the antithesis of what we sometimes hear. And I think having routines and structures, even in the home, to allow them to access lessons remotely, again, assuming that they are even able to do that, and that's where the challenges are. But I think good schools have been able to find a way around that problem. And they've been able to put in initiatives to support the young people through that. But I think
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I see it with my own children and others that you want to make it clear. And actually, I think maybe this is a good time to bring back Natasha, Eilish, and Christiana, bring them in on the conversation too, because I think this point about structure, and I think for a lot of parents, they're doing this, in the most difficult circumstances. They're not teachers, and they're suddenly expected to take on this responsibility. And that idea of structure, of saying, right, we're going to do maths between now and then, there'll be break, and you actually have a sort of like a school timetable. I mean, is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
So for me, that's exactly what we've done. We've moved the whole school timetable remotely. I think we're in a slightly privileged position because we have one-to-one deployment of iPads. So I think that for us, that's a game changer compared to other schools who may not have that access.
You didn't have the technical challenge there.
Yeah, we've had that, absolutely. And I think also the other thing that we need to acknowledge, that I'm working with 16 to 19-year-olds, which is a completely different a challenge compared to, well, it's not even a challenge compared to if you're teaching, for example, year 7s to year 11s. So I think when I'm speaking about what some of the issues, I need to come clean in that sense, because there is clearly a difference between teaching 16 to 19-year-olds who are aspirational, want to go to university, who have access to all their lessons, to young people who might be year 7 to 11, who may be slightly demotivated from what's going on. And I think that's a bigger challenge that some of my colleagues face that I don't face at the NCS.
Natasha, perhaps this is one for you, actually. I mean, there's a question, actually, too, which I will bring in. Emily Patterson asks, can you give some practical examples of how recognizing the challenge of the pandemic influences your online delivery, tone, activities, length of sessions? And as Martin was saying, I mean, this business, it's one thing to have a motivated 17-year-old, quite another trying to do a Zoom lesson with a 7-year-old who's at home, where all the distractions, who can wander off, it's really, really hard. So, I mean, again, sort of just thinking about, we're trying to help young people sort of find that routine. What are the things that you're doing? I mean, do you help parents, for instance, or is it just delivering the packs?
We do help our carers. So the carers that are home educating children who are living in care are struggling. It's really hard. There's challenges with their emotional well-being, as well as trying to educate them online. I think we've noticed with our literacy sessions that we've moved online, we've had to shorten them significantly. So trying to, when we normally do them and we're in school, it's an hour-long session, but we're sort of now doing 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and just doing more of those. So doing them 2 or 3 times a week, as opposed to once a week. And that's working better. I guess we're lucky because the relationships that we've built up with our children in care are really profound. And the vast majority of our children in care are really looking forward to the sessions. So when they're coming,
they're young too. I mean, they're primary age children as well, are they?
They are, yeah, primary and early secondary school.
And that's quite a challenge. Amber's got a question for you, Mohsin. Could Mohsin share what he thinks would be best for universities to be doing with students now to continue to encourage and support them to consider universities? There we are. What should the universities be doing?
Well, I think the universities are really doing a fantastic job. I think this idea that universities are not engaging with young people or schools, I know we're putting on Universities are falling over themselves to run sessions, admission sessions. I know Oxford and Cambridge are definitely doing that. I know some of the other Russell Group universities are doing that. So I think they're already doing loads that they can actually do within the limits that they have. I think the issue is going to be taking students who may have not completed or have large gaps in their knowledge onto courses when they get there and be able to support them during that period. And I think that's where there needs to be greater collaboration between schools and universities in terms of the curriculum coverage and what more we can do in that sphere.
I was really interested in what you were saying in your presentation about that. And Steve Ross has actually put up a question here. Is there any indication that the government is listening to your sensible suggestion that the 2022 exams have a reduced spec to enable a recovery curriculum? And is this conversation now live?
Well, I'm not aware of that conversation taking place, and I haven't seen any of the unions bring that up. I think at the moment the government's pretty much fixated and focused on, rightly so, what's going on at the moment and supporting the young people. But that's happened because there's been poor planning. We knew that this is a potential eventuality, and therefore anyone could have told you, especially in the education sector, that these are the plans that you should be having in place. But they haven't engaged with any of that. And I just worry it's going to be the same thing, one blunder after another, and the people that are going to suffer ultimately are the young people that we ultimately serve.
Yeah, but I think your argument was very well made about the fact that we don't teach them everything even now, and yet we don't worry about the things that we don't teach them. Perhaps we should in some respects, but yeah, we need to be pragmatic about the realities of what this virus has done to everybody. Ailish, a couple of questions for you. Emily Matthew asks, is university always the aim or ambition? I mean, IntoUniversity is a kind of clue, but I'm going to guess it's IntoUniversity ...
Yes, absolutely. University should always be something you have thought about and seen as an option and seen as a potential future. And it's like choosing not to do it rather than never having considered it as a choice. Obviously, we're best placed to advise on university, but we're absolutely here for the young people. So if another pathway is right for them, then that's great, but it's about informed choices.
We've had a couple of questions from anonymous attendee, very busy anonymous, which I'm going to wrap up together. Actually, Ailish, you could probably just pick them up. So which other organisations or charities do IntoUniversity work with to help their young people? And also, is much being done to address housing inequality and how this is affecting children's attainment and ability to learn? I mean, this is, in the end, it's not something you can do alone. It is always going to be about multi-agency support for these people, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we work in partnership with universities. We might have specific partnerships at specific centres. We work with corporate organisations. We work with local charities on the ground. So one of the first things that happened during the first lockdown, was each centre made a list of local organisations and national organisations they can signpost our families to. And in terms of housing, it's a key theme that comes up in our safeguarding concerns, and centre staff have worked tirelessly to kind of sometimes be like a linchpin between various agencies, supporting families with.
Yeah, and that's what support is in a way, isn't it? It's listening and recognising, that's where the gap is. We need to find someone to fill that gap and make this work. Mohsin, Daniel Hall has got a question for you. He says you speak clearly of your concerns for employability and the credibility of centre assessed grades regarding future job prospects. How would you like to see employers settle or alleviate that concern when matching Gatsby benchmark 4 and 5? Would you welcome employer engagement, and how would that suit the needs of your Key Stage 5 learners given issues with contact and digital fatigue? Lot in that question, Mohsin, but what's your thoughts?
Lots. Well, the first thing I would say is that I'm not a big fan of centre assessed grades. I think exams are the fairest system, if you can use that word, or the fairest out of the least fair ways in which you can allocate grades, because we know some of the issues about teacher assessments and how they impact young people and the grades that they're awarded. So I think that's the first point to say. To be honest, I think the issue about employability and soft skills, I think there needs to be an understanding when young people go towards or move towards the university and into applying for jobs, that if, for example, the centre assessed grades are looked upon, they need to have an understanding that the context in which they receive them. And also there needs to be statements from employers, I think, to say to young people from an early stage. And I think this is where the government have been lacking again, the communication to young people and the rest of society about what does this actually mean. So even if you are awarded central assessed grades, the top employers or the big employers should be coming out and saying that we will honor those central assessed grades and we will treat them like everything else. So that gives clarity to everybody so we can move forward. I'm always up for the link between schools, educational institutions and employers. I think that that's a lot of work that still should be done rather than piecemeal again, but more coordinated, comprehensive throughout the life of a student in their school and sixth form.
Yeah. Christiana, there's a question for you. It's from Steve Ross, who asks, well, actually, it relates to exactly what we've been talking about. Do you and your friends at university feel more anxious about employment owing to the effects of the COVID lockdowns? Well, I think I can know the answer to that, but I'd be interested to get your thoughts on, what experience, if any, are you getting from potential employers? I mean, is there a discussion going on about how they're going to think about the grades that you've been given in terms of their relationship to other people's grades, and indeed your experience at university? I mean, where are you at with the employers at the moment, Christiana?
Anxious, yes, for sure. I think we all are, because there's so much uncertainty as to where we can go or what we can do, and I think that's linked to not being able to communicate to the employers directly. You know, if it was a normal year, we would be able to have events where we could meet them, where we can talk and network. And I think back in February of 2020, I was able to go to one of those networking events to meet employers, and that was incredibly helpful. Whereas now that's not a possibility. In terms of
even, I mean, just that sense of not being able to connect,
Mhm.
that really kind of leaves you in the lurch a bit. So it'd be great if universities and other organisations were able to sort of make those connections happen.
Yeah, definitely. And the other point about kind of if what our grades would mean to employers, I don't know if I don't know that I haven't had that information kind of conveyed to me of what they would kind of how they would take the grades, how they would look at candidates. For example, if there was a candidate who was in a COVID year and who was in not a COVID year, what that would look like in terms of employability. So yeah, it's a big question mark on all of those questions. So
there are so many questions coming down the track, to which I mean, this brilliant panel can only offer their best guesses. I think at the moment it's a very, very difficult time. We have sadly run out of time. We could have talked for hours about the amazing work that's going on to support young people right now. And I know that far from withdrawing from the challenge, actually, IntoUniversity has got well-developed plans to expand this year with 6 new centres opening, which is amazing given the circumstances. Now, this isn't a fundraising event, but I do know the charity is on the lookout for partners and support for all that they do. And I can see on the Q&A box, there are all kinds of people talking about donating laptops. And there's certainly, I think, people are enthusiastic about wanting to do something. I mean, there's a wide recognition, I think, that we can't let our young people down. All the questions that we haven't had time for, and there are a few, I know that people will be looking at those, and hopefully they can sort of answer them in a more direct way after this has finished. But for the moment, thank you to our inspiring quartet on our virtual stage this evening, to Christiana, Ailish, Natasha, and Mohsin. Thank you to IntoUniversity for hosting this event. It's been terrific. Thank you to all of you for listening and participating in this conversation. It only remains for me to say to everyone working so hard to support and guide our young people through this incredibly difficult time, well, thank you and the best of luck. For the moment, though, from me, Mark Easton, take care, stay well, and goodbye.